Allow me to present to you this old map. It shows the northern half of South America, is printed in German, and shows borders that look mostly familiar. The question that now arises is simply, how old is this map? And how far can we narrow down the time period for which the map was accurate? Not perfectly, not academically, and without qualifications. Just borders, names, the power of the internet, and a slightly unhealthy amount of confidence. For this purpose, a timeline will be displayed below where you can track our progress. At the moment, this map could be from literally any time. Well, any time after Europeans started drawing South America, of course. So we begin with the broadest possible time frame. All of modern history. That is why our timeline starts in 1500. Let's start looking for clues. At first glance, many of the modern countries are already here. That alone tells us something important. Most of South America spent centuries as Spanish colonies. But in the early 19th century, those colonies all began declaring independence in quick succession. Revolutions everywhere. New flags, new names, new borders. Which means this map is certainly post-colonial. Therefore, we can set the start of the timeline to 1800. But that still leaves us with roughly 2 centuries. So we need something better. Our first real clue appears in form of the name Colombia itself. Now, this is helpful because Colombia has had a surprisingly complicated relationship with its own name. After independence from Spain, it went through several identities. Gran Colombia, Republic of New Granada, Grenadine Confederation, United States of Colombia, and finally, the Republic of Colombia. Each change lovingly accompanied by a civil war or two. So, the obvious question is, which Colombia are we looking at? Let's start chronologically and rule them out until one fits. First candidate is Gran Colombia, which existed from 1819 to 1831. It included modern Colombia, Panama, Venezuela, and Ecuador. The latter two are clearly separate countries on this map. Between Ecuador and Venezuela gaining independence and Gran Colombia dissolving is a small time window, but we can ignore it for now. That places us after 1830 and we can adjust the timeline accordingly. However, Panama is still attached to Colombia, and Panama only became independent in 1903. So our timeline is now 1830 to 1903, a respectable start. But we can narrow it down further, and we haven't even finished with Colombia yet. The next 2 iterations of Colombia in the list are the Republic of New Granada and the Grenadine Confederation. As attentive viewers will have noticed, neither of them actually contain the word Colombia at all, and on this map, the country is explicitly labeled as such. That means we can skip those periods entirely, which moves our start date to 1863, when the United States of Colombia was established. So now, our window is 1863 to 1903. This leaves us with a time span of 40 years. Let's move up north a bit. Here, we can see Nicaragua, where there is a faint but interesting feature. Can you see this dotted line? That's the border of the Mosquito Reserve. This autonomous region along the Caribbean coast was under British influence until 1860, when it was given to Nicaragua. Nicaragua finally incorporated this territory fully in 1894. Since the reserve appears on the map, it obviously must still exist, which gives us a new upper limit. Our timeline becomes 1863 to 1894. The next point of interest is the border of Chile, and to some viewers, that border may look a little strange. This is not only because it is neither the current border nor a border as often seen on historical maps, but that's actually what makes maps, and in particular old maps, so interesting to me. Borders are drawn very different depending on the era in which the map was made, who created it, what its purpose was, and how the situation was interpreted. The Chilean border on this map is a really good example of that. For a bit of context, in 1879, the War of the Pacific broke out between Chile and an alliance of Bolivia and Peru. The war ended in 1884 with an armistice between Chile and Bolivia. A year earlier, in 1883, Chile and Peru had already signed a peace treaty known as the Treaty of Ancón. Article 3 of this treaty later became the most controversial part. It stated that the provinces of Tacna and Arica would remain under Chilean administration for 10 years. After that, a plebiscite was supposed to be held so the inhabitants could decide which country they wanted to belong to. However, this referendum was never actually held, and the situation remained unresolved until 1929. And this is where the earlier point about maps comes into play. The map we're looking at here is a German map. German atlases, especially high-quality academic ones, tended to follow formal treaty law very strictly. In other words, they focused on the de jure situation, the legal arrangement according to treaties, rather than the de facto situation on the ground, which would involve more interpretation. This reflects a very conservative and quite sophisticated cartographic approach. Because of that, the Chilean border on this map aligns perfectly with the post-1883 treaty arrangement. So now our timeline shifts again. We are now somewhere after 1883, and then we find one last detail. If we take a closer look at today's Panama, there we can see the city of Colón is labeled as Colón Aspinwall. Aspinwall was the older American name, used during the railroad era. But the double naming, Colón with Aspinwall in parentheses, was only common on maps between 1850 and about 1890, before the use of the name Aspinwall rapidly declined, which means our map is almost certainly from before 1890. In summary, our final timeline now spans from 1883 to 1890. With an irresponsibly high level of confidence, we can conclude that the mystery has been solved, or at least solved confidently enough for a short YouTube video. If you spot any more details that could help narrow down the time frame even further, or if you want to correct something, then don't let me know in the comments. Next time, we will try to find the lost city of Atlantis using simple methods or just date another map. You will then find out which of the two we ended up doing. See you then!